Well, someone that has been criticized inside the administration, and we'll say a lot of blame has been placed on this person for some failures that people perceive of the administration, is Susie Wiles. And there have been rumors that as of next year, there's going to be a shake-up in the staffing and that Susie Wiles could be one of the people that will be shaken up. And it's interesting because now we've started to get these articles being published where it seems that Susie Wiles is turning on President Trump and some of the staff. This is from Mediaite. It says Susie Wiles trashes Bondi as she tells all about Epstein files in explosive interview. It sure as hell wasn't on her desk. President Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, ripped into AG Pam Bondi over the botched release of the Epstein files in an exclusive interview with Vanity Fair, saying America's top prosecutor gave a bunch of right-wing influencers binders full of nothingness. We can agree with that. The shockingly blunt statements came to light in a piece from Chris Whipples that dropped on Tuesday, the result of months of on-the-record talks with the rarely interviewed top Trump official. In one portion of the two-part interview, Wiles discussed Bondi's handling of the Epstein files, including the March stunt, where a group of right-wing influencers were given binders labelled The Epstein Files, Phase 1. And let's just all remember that very unique photo op that presented itself at the White House there, lest we forget. It goes on, quote, I think she completely whiffed on appreciating that that was the very targeted group that cared about this, Wiles told Whipple, adding that they were binders full of nothingness. True. Wiles also addressed Bondi's insistence during a Fox News interview in February that Epstein's client list was, quote, on my desk right now, a claim that was later debunked by an FBI report that stated no such document existed. And then she said that the witness list, or the client list, was on her desk. Wiles told Whipple, there is no client list and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk, Wiles said. The astonishingly candid Vanity Fair article also revealed Wiles' wild labels for others in the Trump White House, including, quote, quirky Bobby for HHS honcho Robert Kennedy Jr. and odd duck for Elon Musk, to name a few. Not long after it was published, Wiles scolded the magazine and called the article a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. And she said that significant context was disregarded and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. The truth is the Trump White House has already accomplished more in 11 months than any other president has accomplished in 8 years, and that is due to the unmatched leadership and vision of President Trump, for whom I have been honored to work for the better part of a decade. None of this will stop our relentless pursuit of making America great again, she says. Now, if it is actually the case that Vanity Fair misrepresented Susie Wiles and her statements and left out context, that would not be new for the mainstream media or the establishment media. They do this all the time. Do you know what the problem is, though? That the Trump administration, or President Trump himself, I should say, was elected largely due to podcasters, largely due to independent media, and people like Rogan, for example, interviewing him and his willingness to appear on these independent media networks rather than the establishment media prior to the election. But since being elected, there's been barely any of that. The administration has stuck to Fox News and the old school media and really not given independent media any time of day. They appear with a select chosen few occasionally, but independent media has been left by the wayside. And so what they could be achieving is real interviews without misrepresented viewpoints, without the spin, without an agenda of the Democratic Party or donors or anyone. They could be doing this, but they refuse. They keep going back to the establishment media, and that is a lesson for them to learn. And then we have the question of, well, why do they keep doing that? And is there actually political gain to doing this? And is there something more to this? We want to show you one more article. This is CNBC reporting on a New York Times piece. Top Trump aide Susie Wiles says that he has an alcoholic's personality, sought retribution against New York AG Letitia James. It says, President Donald Trump has an alcoholic's personality and has engaged in legal retribution against his enemies since his return to office, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles said in a remarkably candid series of interviews with Vanity Fair published Tuesday. Wiles said in March that she and Trump had a, quote, loose agreement that the score settling will end before the first 90 days are over. Around 5 months later, she initially denied that Trump was on a retribution tour, contending that he was motivated by getting people that have done bad things out of the government. And, that was definitely stated motivation of President Trump, but we haven't actually seen that materialize. There's been a lot of accusations flying back and forth, a lot of memes about arresting Obama, but no actual accountability has materialized. It says that Susie Wiles admitted in some cases it may look like retribution, and there may be an element of that from time to time, such as the administration's attempted prosecution of New York AG Letitia James might be the one retribution. And by the way, that's one that MAGA and everyone with a brain agreed with. An AG that comes in and says that her mission is to take someone down, essentially, rather than just be focusing on being an AG, should be held to account for having ideological motives rather than the job description at hand as her motivating factor. People expected people like this to be taken out of government because there are clear indicators that they may not be the right ones to serve, but ultimately that effort failed. Another portion of the article of interest here is Wiles, whose father, former New York Giants kicker Pat Summerall, is described as an alcoholic and an absentee parent, said her difficult upbringing made her, quote, a little bit of an expert on big personalities. Trump does not drink, but he has an alcoholic's personality in that he operates with a view that there's nothing that he can't do, Wiles told Whipple. Nothing, zero, nothing. So it could very well be that Vanity Fair left out important context with those series of interviews, and Caroline Leavitt's come out and said something to that effect, essentially stating Susie Wiles has been an integral part in the achievements of President Trump in the first 11 months of his presidency. Polls would indicate that people are not as convinced about these so-called achievements of the first 11 months, and those poll numbers are, really shocking, actually. But we go back to our previous point of the administration just being in bed with the establishment media and choosing to speak to these media outlets that they have repeatedly, and maybe not specifically Vanity Fair, but repeatedly referred to as fake news. The whole point of Trump was that he was taking down the fake news media. And yet we've seen this blockout of the independent media and podcasters that actually helped get President Trump elected, and, selective curated interviews from people who will say and do anything for the point of continued access instead of asking hard questions. This has been a repeated problem, especially of late. Just as a reminder, Joe Rogan's interview with President Trump last year on YouTube alone got 60 million views, not to mention the millions and millions of views on X. Trump grew his following and support on the campaign trail and essentially won the election based on the fact that he listened to his base, with at times real-time response. Now, we can clearly see, for better or for worse, the base is fractured, with people falling into camps based on certain aspects of the governance of the current admin. There's a clear group currently in total support of anything the admin does. Having said that, there is also another clear group, one that has traditionally supported President Trump and essentially still does, but requests accountability of sorts, an arguably bigger group, that they're not. They're not just supporting everything, and it seems they're not being heard, some may say being totally ignored. And this is where we get to the point that many of these people have expressed their belief that the problem is Susie Wiles or Pam Bondi or Kash Patel, essentially the same arguments from the first presidency, that the problem was not President Trump, but the staff around him who were stifling his agenda. The only hole in that argument could be that every time the base has expressed their disdain for certain figures, Trump has come back in full support of them. So we can't use that excuse anymore, people say. Now, we hear rumors that there may be a shakeup next year, and perhaps some of this establishment narrative is coming out ahead of that. To support that narrative, yes, you guys were right. The problem isn't that the agenda continues no matter who's in office. It's just some of the faces you've noticed aren't doing what was promised. We'll change them around for you. We don't know. We don't ever truly know what's in the government's mind, really. What we do know is that if they were really committed to transparency, They would be more willing to speak to more media rather than a curated list of select influencers and establishment media. We'll see what happens in the new year.